We have the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. It's February the 11th. We have a quorum, Mr. Weezer, Ms. Gruhl, Mr. Smith, Mr. Rosenthal, myself, Bernard Parks, as chair. If we can go through the agenda, we have 4 items on closed session. If we have a concurrence with the committee, if we can move items 8, 9, 10, and 11 on consent. If we can do that, we have a couple of items on 9. There's an amended motion for specific information about the funding location, and then a couple of issues on 10 and 11. So we can move those 4.
So moved.
Okay. And on 9, as I said, there's an amending motion that basically identifies the placement of the funds, the contribution to the Public Works Trust Fund, and then also if we could include in the report, let's see, certain things if we can get from the committee report, when the project will commence. Also, if the $50,000 expected to fully fund the project, and then is the city or who's responsible for maintenance on that one. And then on 10, just need to ask if the involved department or the city attorney, if they intend to seek that grant in the subsequent years. And then 11, we concur with the committee's reports, but also the same thing as LAPD going to seek this grant in future years. So if we can move those 4 on consent, we'll go to closed session for items 1 through 4, and we'll come back for item 5, and we'll handle 6 and 7 together.
Hi, Mr. Parks.
Hi there, how you doing?
Fine, how are you?
I'm doing great. reconvene. We have a full committee, and so we can go to item.
Number five, which is a motion, Garcetti Reyes, City Administrative Officer and Department of Planning reports, and City Attorney report and ordinance relative to a proposed amendment to the city's Mills Act ordinance. The Planning and Land Use Management Committee on July 3rd, 2007 took various actions. The Planning Department and the Cultural Heritage Commission have requested that the ordinance be amended to increase the pre-contract assessed valuation limit of $500,000 for single-family dwellings be increased to $1.5 million, and then to also increase the valuation limit for the multifamily, commercial, and industrial building to $3 million. And Jacob Westler is here with our office along with planning.
Let me just ask, I think, just a couple of questions. On what I didn't understand, if most of these that come through, that we go through a waiver, what's the rationale of changing the ordinance? I didn't quite understand that.
Good afternoon. Ken Bernstein with the Office of Historic Resources in the Planning Department. The rationale is that these valuation limits were set in 1996 when the ordinance was passed. The median home value in 1996 was $162,000. That has more than tripled since that time. The ordinance allows for a waiver, an exemption essentially, to those valuation limits to be approved by the Cultural Heritage Commission, and in practice the Commission has been approving those on a regular basis. However, there is confusion, I think, in general about the program, whether individual homeowners, for example, are eligible for the program based on those valuation limits. In addition, we want to better target the program to low and moderate income homeowners and owners of more modest commercial buildings, and having a more realistic limit that reflects current real estate values will enable us to better market the program and target it to the intended beneficiaries.
Okay. And then let me ask, as part of the, I guess, the planning fee study, is that going to look at this particular fee and see if we're getting full cost recovery?
Yes, we do have an application fee currently for the Mills Act program. We would want that to be revisited and studied as part of that broader fee study.
Okay. And then is with the current ordinance, if I read it correctly, we believe we're losing about $1 million a year. Is that collectively or?
In aggregate, there's a limit that was set in the ordinance that the city was willing to forego a total of $1 million annually in revenue. However, we are at less than 30% of that current cap. Currently, we're at about $300,000 with the contracts that were just approved at the end of last year. We have 382 Mills Act contracts currently, and again, we're only at about 30% of capacity up to that $1 million limit.
And what did we use as a criteria to move it to 1.5 and 3 million?
In part, again, looking at the original, the intent of the original ordinance and the valuation limits that were set, that the median income in median home, in 1996 was $162,000. That original limit was a little over 3 times the median home sale level at that time, and looking at a median home price today of somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000, keeping that ratio intact. We have not seen the same level of escalation for commercial properties, so we're looking at a doubling of the original valuation limit for commercial properties.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question on 2 projects in my district that have Mills Act, both the Chase Knowles, right? And that's valued, though, greater than $3 million. How does that work?
Yes, that had an exemption that was valued considerably higher, so that was approved on an exemption by the Cultural Heritage Commission several years ago.
Okay, so there can be exceptions to this. It's
That's
not a
right.
hard and fast. Okay.
And that's how most of these have been approved. The Commission approved, I think, about 29 exemptions out of the 70 or so Mills Act contracts that were approved last year. So a large number of these have been homes worth more than $500,000, in part because it's difficult to find a historic home in most of Los Angeles that is worth less than $500,000.
And we're about ready to, on the Laurelwood, am I thinking the right? Yes. Take back their mills.
Yes, we are going through an enforcement procedure based on violations in that contract. That would be the first
First
time
ever.
since 1996 that we've had this program that we've gone through that procedure. And so that's now being referred to the Cultural Heritage Commission for initial recommendations, and will be coming back through Plum Committee within the next month or two.
What will be the financial impact of that on the homeowner, which, based on that, she has not, okay.
Councilwoman Gruhl, that's really not part of this.
Well, I'll ask in a general sense then, because I think that the reason it's here before Budget and Finance is the loss of taxable, what happens when a Mills Act contract is overturned, since it's whenever it is, how does that impact that owner of that property and the city of Los Angeles as far as budgetary income?
Yeah, there is a financial penalty equivalent to 12.5% of the current valuation of the property. So there would be a set of findings that would be made by the council, and that assessment of 12.5% of whatever the current market valuation would be the financial penalty.
Which would mean to potentially recover any of the benefits they had received over that period of time. I mean,
That's the intent. That's the intent behind the penalty, that the owner has been benefiting from property tax reductions over the last several years. But if the finding is made that the owner has not been maintaining their side of the contract in terms of maintenance and rehabilitation, the city is recapturing some of those financial benefits.
It would be interesting to see, again, we hope that doesn't happen frequently and have one experience, but whether or not what 12.5 represents ultimately, and if in fact that is equal to what we would have been getting over that period of time.
12.5% of a large multifamily complex can be a large number.
Yeah.
So.
This is, so the Mills, I thought the Mills Act is this enabling legislation that we have at the local level? It's also it's a federal statute, correct?
It's a state law,
It's a state law.
that is implemented by local governments throughout.
And then local entities enable that state law.
At their own enabling ordinances,
And we
correct.
do our own criteria.
Right, so this is just amended. The only change this is making is just literally changing those numbers, the valuation limits in the ordinance. The enabling ordinance is otherwise remaining exactly the same.
Well, if we want to incentivize more people to preserve their home, and we want to incentivize more of our city's history to stay intact, the only thing we're really doing here is raising the threshold for which people qualify, correct? Why not give them a bigger break on their property taxes? I'll tell you why. I preserved my home these last 3 years or so, and I looked at this and I says, it's not really worth the hassle. It's not going to give me that much of a benefit in my own property taxes. I'm not going to do this, I thought to myself. Whereas, I preserved my home simply because I wanted to. Whereas I think if another person would have bought my home in that condition, and they would have seen the financial benefits, and they were deciding whether they wanted to preserve, they probably would have. It's not that much of a benefit as I see it.
Well, the benefit varies depending on a variety of circumstances, including how long someone has owned their home, benefiting from Prop 13's limits on annual increases and so forth. It averages, we have some homeowners in the program who are saving 70, 80, or even greater than 80% on their property taxes, others who are benefiting much more minimally. We don't have the ability to change the formula under which the Mills Act valuation is calculated.
Oh, we don't have that ability.
We don't have that ability. That is something that is set in the state law and is worked through with the county assessor's office as well, since the county handles property tax assessments. We have the responsibility of overseeing the management of the program, the monitoring of compliance with the contracts to ensure that the rehabilitation that the owners say they're going to do, or those rehabilitation and maintenance responsibilities are maintained at the local level. But we don't have the ability to grant a greater incentive than is provided for under the state law.
And it is going to vary depending on a person, whether it's pre-Prop 13 or post-Prop 13, and how much they're paying for that.
It does vary.
Yeah, it does vary.
This is really the only major financial incentive that we offer in the city, and certainly one of our goals in the Office of Historic Resources is to work with other departments, the Housing Department, CRA, and others, to develop other incentives, particularly for low and moderate income homeowners, in trying to rehabilitate their historic homes. But this is the most important financial incentive that we have in the city for owners of historic properties.
And let me tell you, I mean, I think as we could probably assume, a lot of our older housing stock or older buildings are in low-income areas, given just the way people have been traveling with their feet to newer neighborhoods as you get wealthier. It's just a historic thing that happens in cities. And the thing that is going to incentivize them is the financial incentive, but it's really unfortunate that this is the only thing, the only tool we have to make that possible. And believe me, I searched and searched and searched.
No, as I said, we would like to have other tools in the toolbox, and it's something that our office would certainly love to work with you and other departments to develop.
Now, the impact on our general fund is what?
It is roughly $300,000 in foregone revenues.
Yeah, it's not much considering the value there is to preserving some of these beautiful buildings. Yeah, thanks.
The only suggestion I'd have is, here we are changing it, so the numbers are firm again. A couple of years from now, we're going to come back and change again. Why don't we just set it and index it? Index to whatever the average homeowner price is automatically 3 times, and write the language that way, so you don't have to keep coming back and changing it every few years.
We can do it that way. I think the benefit of having a set amount is just in terms of the marketing of the program, to be able to have a consistent message and materials that don't have to change every year to the penny. So we're certainly open to that, but I think there's also some value in setting a limit that's realistic. Home values are now declining a little bit, and I think these amounts are reasonable for where we expect the market might go in the next several years. I wouldn't anticipate we'd have to come back for several years to change these.
When you said 70% benefits for some folks, is that a pre-Prop 13 kind of a house?
Those who are experiencing that type of benefit typically would be a newer owner, someone who's bought their home in the last several years during the run-up in real estate values, someone who has owned their home, for example, since the 1970s and had very minimal increases each year would be saving less. The benefit runs with the property, and even many home buyers homeowners that may not have a huge percentage decrease currently, those who might plan to sell their house and have it reassessed upon the sale for the new buyer realize that it can be a substantial benefit for a future buyer. And so it's a 10-year contract that renews annually, and it does run with the property.
Interesting. Because my house is an old one, too, 1924, built by the Mormons.
Register it.
It's historic.
1928. 1928.
Okay.
Yeah, Newt Romney signed. No.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'll move that item.
Just wish we could be doing more. There's not much.
Okay, it takes us to item number 6, which is a city planning report relative to the implementation schedule for the centralized case condition clearance and tracking system project. This request came out of last year's budget deliberations, where the committee instructed the department to report back.
Can we handle 6 and 7 together?
Yep, I'll read that off too. 7 is a planning report relative to a policy to require all city community plans to be updated on an 8 to 10 year cycle. And this was, yes, also requested through committee.
Schoberg, how you doing? Yeah.
I will defer to Eva on item 6.
Okay. Let me just ask a question on item 6. The concern I had was the issue, because I thought what drove this was the thought that we had projects in the queue or completed, and we'd constantly go back and find out their conditions weren't completed. And then when we read this, we're talking about going forward, and it appears the expectation is not to go back and find out where we are on older projects. And I'm just wondering why because it seems like the intent was different than what we've come up with.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Eva Yuan McDaniel, City Planning. When we first designed the system because of budget restriction, we only designed the system to go day forward to capture all the new conditions. However, in the budget hearing for 07-08, we were asked to look at what will take to capture some previously approved cases, and we did that. working with CAO's office, CLA, and the planners, we have identified about 500 previously approved cases will have significant, or still in the pipeline and are being cleared. And we estimate about average 50 conditions per case. Based on that, the planning department has estimated it will take about 240 hours of system staff and planners' time to identify these cases and also to obtain the images of the documents or find the hard copies. And that will cost about $18,000 based on the hours, the estimated hours. And then it will take about a little over 2,000 hours to physically capture the conditions into the database. And that can be done either by a contractor or a temp help or clerical staff in the department, and with the estimate cost about a little over $100,000. So that should meet the needs of the critical condition tracking needs.
Okay, and so you're saying that the 100,000 is what, bringing in temps, or is that city employees, or what group would
The
do that?
100,000 could be in the form of city employee time, or if use contractor services money, we can hire the contractors to come in and do the data entry for us. So, but the $18,000 that will have to be done in the planning department, given to the planning department, because it takes knowledge to identify these cases. Not anyone or anyone from the outside can be assigned to do that task.
Okay, so it needs a specific planning department person to identify the cases. Once they identify them, then you have an option either side, either a department employee or outside vendor could input them in the system.
Yes.
Okay.
And inside employees will be clerical staff, not planners, because this physically typing in or scanning and OCR the images of the conditions.
Okay. Let me ask, Ms. Goldberg, if this was, the input was spread over a longer period of time, is that something that how would that impact your employees, or could that be done without any additional cost? I know it's $100,000 in personnel costs, but could it be absorbed if it was spread out over time?
You know, I've reached the point where it's difficult to say that we can absorb anything more, because we're getting spread so thin. We're getting wonderful programs, and I'll point out we just took on, Bring Back Broadway with no staffing, and we're taking on programs. It's getting to the point where we're not getting the work done that we're supposed to do. So I'm hesitant to say that we can absorb more work.
Do we know if, or can we estimate that if any of these conditions that are not met, are any of them revenue generating, or is any benefit financially to the city?
I off the top of my head, I would not imagine so.
Because I think some of these, what I thought when this came up is we'd have incidents where there was conditions where people were to maybe
Pay money or
mitigation plan or things like that. I thought that's what drove this, is that these...
There's some conditions that will bring money to the city. For example, the Easy Loop money, $50,000, it was based on a condition, development condition. However, the money was to use to build additional things in the community so it's not going to create any revenue in the planning department.
Okay. But the issue is that you say you need about $18,000
yes.
to do the thorough review to know where we are.
right.
And then we can make an assessment as to, of that review, how many cases should be input. We may find in that review that a large percentage of them are closed out. Would that...
That was not my understanding, so I'm going to let
These are all
Eva-
pending?
No, the $18,000 in equivalent of 240 hours is staff time to pull those cases. And also query our systems to identify the case number. It's not to do assessment. It will actually pull those cases out for data entry.
Okay, but if you pull them out, would you assess them to determine if they were closed and all of the conditions
Yeah,
were met?
we have already done some preliminary analysis of which cases will be pulled.
Okay.
So the 240 hours will be used to pull those cases and identify the images to capture.
Yeah, that was my understanding, that we already had done a preliminary assessment and determined that those would be the number of cases and the cases that we would need to pull.
Okay, and we say need to pull because they have conditions that are
Yes.
not been concluded?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
No, 6.
Anything?
No, but-
Because one of the things, I'm going back a little ways, but I'd like to see if we go through this and find out what cases, if we've done that, would that be within the 18,000 you're talking about before we go through the input? I'm trying to figure out
Councilman,
how you
mean
broke it
to
down.
Identify those
Yeah,
cases
identify the cases.
specifically?
Because if I understand it, if you go through and identify them, you could have a circumstance in which the cases, some would not be worthy of being inputted.
That's
Okay?
correct.
So then
if-
you'd be cleaning it out to where you may not have but a handful, and then it wouldn't be the $100,000 if you found that most of them did not require to be inputted or they've been resolved.
Once we identify, we pull those cases, yes, we can do a review and eliminate the ones that are really not critical. The 106,000 may become less.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, so now what do you need to get to that point? What is,
If council decides that we should go ahead and do that, I would suggest that the 18,000 be put in the planning department as overtime, because this requires existing staff to do the work, no new staff. And then, staff can use overtime and do the first task. And then after we reach the point that we have all the cases, then we can do another level of analysis and see how much we can eliminate, then decide what the second step how much the second step will cost.
so if we look at it in two phases, the first phase, you get 18,000, would
Yes.
get you to the point of knowing how many existing cases have outstanding conditions.
Yes.
And then you'd be able to make an assessment of what would be the workload that would actually have to go and be input into the system.
Yes, the first one must be done before the second one can start.
I mean, Ray, could we do something on, because I think what the intent is to get some sense of the older cases. It's great to have going forward, but what we always complaints that come up is there's some existing condition that didn't occur, and then the belief is that someone cut a deal to get the project off the ground or completed, and there's lingering conditions. So if we can find $18,000 somewhere in our budget desk, and find a way to get that done, and then have a report back once they complete that work to come back and tell us of the numbers they looked at, what numbers viable to go into the analysis or into the system, and then what that cost is, and we can maybe cut it in half and see what's going on with a report back on that.
Yeah, we just go ahead and instruct them to use overtime to get to that first phase, and we'll just absorb it in our FSR budget desk.
So if we recommend,
Hold on, I think it's right here. 18,000.
so how would we do that on this committee report, that we just recommend that they use overtime?
I think you can just instruct them to use overtime.
Use overtime for that phase one, and then report back on phase two before we go forward. So then
We will do, thank you.
Okay, so on number 147, that would be the instruction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want me to respond? The second item is
Yeah, number
a discussion of the community plan update cycle and an action that would establish a 10-year cycle for community plans so that we could be assured that every year 12 plans will be funded, so that we do not raise expectations and then not meet them, and so that we can continue to meet the commitment that we've made to the communities and to the developers, frankly. A lot of the complaints about the development process really has to do with not having good plans on the floor that allow developers to have an easy time doing what we want them to do.
Let me ask, on the cost figures that you gave us on your report, is that hiring people to complete the work? Is that new staff or?
No, the staff is already established to do the 12 plans. The budget impact each year is the cost of any technical work or overtime work to support the plans. The first year of any planning process is a lot of community outreach, identifying issues. The second year is a lot of technical work, the environmental process, all of the traffic analysis, that kind of stuff. And then the third year is, again, a big public review. So we have the staff in place. It's the consultant, the technical studies that go along with the work that we would need some commitment for.
Okay. And then let me ask you, when you do your plan study, is that, and also I think you're thinking about an enterprise fund?
Well, interestingly, as we do our Nexus fee study, which we are doing now, in San Diego, we established and had done for a number of years a surcharge on all permits that we called our general plan maintenance fee. And this did not cover the cost of all of the long-range planning work, but it made a significant contribution to it every year because developers benefit greatly from having accurate, up-to-date plans. And when we did this in San Diego, we found that many cities across the state and across the country charged a fee to help with the long-range planning effort. So that is a part of our fee study.
That's part of the fee study. Now, what about in the sense of the fee study about the enterprise fund? Is that also part of it?
Yes, the fee study is basically to cover the entire development entitlement process because it is our belief that the general fund should not be subsidizing entitlement work for developers. So it's our expectation to do this fee study, establish a fee schedule that would set up an enterprise fund for that portion of the planning department that's doing entitlement. And it would be our objective to make certain that that is fully cost recoverable. And at the same time, we would look to establish a surcharge that would be also applied to all entitlements and permits that would bring in an additional revenue source, not to cover all of long-range planning, but to contribute toward the community plans and the general plans. And it's called a general plan maintenance fee. And you know the general plan also contains all of the community plans. The community plans collectively make up the land use element of the general plan. So it's a general plan maintenance fee.
When would that study be finished?
Well, we just got the money for the fee about a month and a half ago. We did an RFP. We went out with the RFP. We had a pre-proposal conference last week. We expect to have the proposals in by the end of February. We will review them in March and hopefully enter into a contract. I cannot tell you right now. We were hopeful that they could do a fee study in 3 or 4 months. At the pre-proposal conference, we heard from many of the consultants that they believed it to be a 3 to 6 month study at a minimum. So I can't tell you exactly when it will be done, except that we are going to get it done as quickly as we can to get it in place.
Okay. And then let me ask you, on the surcharge as part of that, when would that kick in and when you begin to realize that?
Well, again, we need to get the fee study complete, and if we get that done in 4 months, I mean, we will bring it back, to you as quickly as we get that information.
But that surcharge would be a part of it?
Yes, it's a part of the total fee. It is possible, by the way, it may be less complicated to move forward with that surcharge, and we will have the consultants assess that. I mean, it may be possible to bring that forward more quickly. I don't know.
So that would require an additional fund in addition to the enterprise. You then would have this surcharge fund.
Exactly. The surcharge would not go into the enterprise fund. It would go toward, it could replace some of the general fund money that goes to long-range planning.
Okay.
What's our current timeline that we normally would do a community plan?
Right now, our timeline for the new process is 3 years. In the past, it has taken 5 years. It's taken sometimes longer than that. And I have to point out that in the past, it's not clear to me what took so long, because in the end, you really didn't have very much. But when we adopted community plans in the past, they were not adopted with the implementation tools in place. So there was a whole other phase. You adopted a community plan, and then it went into an implementation phase where somewhere down the line, rezonings took place or whatever you needed to do to actually make the community plan happen. For those of you who aren't aware, a community plan is a policy document. It by itself doesn't make anything happen. It has land use designation and lays out all the policies. In the new community plan process, when we take forward a community plan, it will have an EIR, the old ones did not, and the new community plan will go forward with all of the implementation tools that are required to make it happen when you adopt it. So when we bring you a community plan, we will bring you a zoning ordinance that rezones the property. We will bring you any development regulations that need to be put into place, any design overlays that need to be put into place to protect neighborhood character. I mean, if we had good community plans, you would not need a mansionization ordinance. We would do this on a community-by-community basis based on the needs of the neighborhood. So that is our goal.
Is this shortening the process overall?
Oh, I think absolutely, because
the 3 to 5 years, although it was just
I don't know.
It wasn't the implementation. Yeah. So this is it's all together.
The entire thing should be done in 3 years.
So the 8 to 10 cycle is...
So that gives you like a 10-year, just about a 10-year cycle, so that if we complete Hollywood this year, at the end of 10 years, we would have Hollywood completed again. You know, we would start it, I think, in about the 7th year, but that's how the cycle goes. And that's how it should be done. Yeah. And it allows us each time we do them to get better at it, and we have a long way to go. And there's so many things that we could be doing with those community plans to bring in infrastructure money, to do so many things that could make the community plans better. And I've talked to some of you about it, but in San Diego, when we adopt a community plan, we not only adopt all of the implementing ordinances, but we adopt a facilities financing plan with it that has a financing plan that deals with all of the infrastructure that is identified in a community plan, and a fee is established for every community, a development impact fee that deals with the infrastructure needs of those communities. That's how most cities do it, and ultimately, I mean, we've got a ways to go, but ultimately, that's what we need to have in this city.
On the general plan maintenance fee that you did in San
Yes.
Diego, is that based on square footage? Is that just per project?
I think that it was a percentage of the permit costs. My recollection is that it was a simple surcharge, that whatever your permit fees were, that there was an additional 5% or whatever it was. I don't remember, but my recollection is that it was a surcharge on the cost of the permits.
Yeah, if we had a community plan, we wouldn't need industrial land use policies either, right?
No, we wouldn't. You're right. You're absolutely right. And that is exactly where, if we had up-to-date general plans, we would have the citywide policies there, and they would be implemented through the community plans. And as you and I have spoken, there's so many creative things that we can do in the community plan, we believe, to meet not only the job needs of this city, but to meet the needs that you have expressed and many of the industrial property owners.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan and supporter of your do real planning. I think it's the right direction to go on. These community plans gets us on long-term planning about what type of infrastructure, housing, and communities we would like to see. And I agree with everything you said. One final piece, though, on the financing. Aren't community plans and general plans more of visionary documents to some extent, where you say this is the direction we're going? So to have everything in place, including the financing, when you talk about public projects or even physical projects, it's difficult to identify all the financing when you adopt those community plans. So I find that hard to believe.
It is if your knowledge of community plans is the LA experience. I think it is difficult to believe. And we have a long way to go until we get to a point where the plans are comprehensive enough, detailed enough, have enough community input to really result in what I'm talking about. But many cities throughout the country have those kinds of plans. And I believe that LA can have those kinds of plans. But you're right, it will take a little while for us to get there. We have to build community trust. People have to be able to depend on the community plans. But we need desperately, council member, to begin to associate development with infrastructure in this city. If communities only see new density and new intensity of development, and they do not associate that development with the provision of new facilities to support that development and to make their neighborhoods better, we will ultimately fail. And so we need to move in that direction.
Okay, thank you.
More definition of infrastructure when you say buildings?
Well, let me tell you how it sort of worked in San Diego, and this is not a San Diego model. I had in planning department 15 people who were the facilities financing section. And for every community plan, every facility that was identified in the community plan, and we identified libraries, parks, we identified fire stations, we identified transportation improvements that needed to be made. We did not identify things like water and sewer because we already had funding mechanisms and plans in place, but those kinds of infrastructure, including transportation. And any project that was identified in the community plan became a project in the facilities financing plan. And there was a page for every project. It identified existing funding sources because sometimes there were outside sources that had made some contribution or there was some money available. And every project was priced out, and then the gap between the money that you already had, maybe you had some bond money for libraries, maybe you had some bond money or Quimby for parks, the gap between what you had and what you needed was then taken and a calculation created to attribute what portion of that gap was attributable to the existing development that was there. You cannot charge a developer for the needs of your existing community. And what portion of that gap was attributable to the new development. And then a fee is established for new development that is different in every community, depending on what the gap is. The money is collected only for that community, is kept in an enterprise fund with interest gathering. The council members in San Diego with the communities take that list of projects and prioritize it. And they do that about every 3 years. The ones they want most, they put on the top. When the fund collects enough money to fill the gap for the first project, it gets built. Do you get all the projects built? No. But communities know what their next project is. They know how much money is there. They know that if a 500-unit apartment building is going in, that if they can figure out how to do, make the design work, that they know they're going to get this much money. And development equals infrastructure to them, and we need that to happen here.
Absolutely.
People need to see a benefit from development here. That's where I'd like to get.
I'm very interested in that concept, because the criticism I've always had about LA is we do these incremental approvals, and sooner the cumulative impact is never taken into account. You need 25 units here, 75 there, 100 there. The impact on each individual is a stop sign. But the cumulative impact is you need left turn phasing and new lights and all. Mm-hmm. We never get that. And so I'm really excited about this concept if you would.
And it starts, though, with, right now, a lot of the information one would need to do that doesn't even exist here. Yeah. So the first thing we're trying to do in the new community plans is make certain that the public facilities section of the community plans list every facility that we have now. We don't even have a good measure of what's there. And to begin to talk about what the needs are so that we can ultimately create the database that will be required to do what I'm talking about. And it's not just San Diego. My facility, it took 15 people to create, they created every facilities financing plan, they kept them up to date, created the fees, and they were paid for out of that fee that came in. It didn't cost anything. And it's a good system that creates some trust with the community. And many cities do it.
Yeah. What we do here is something we just started recently, and that is we asked our city engineer and other departments, CLA, everybody, sit down and talk about future projected needs,
Right.
what we know is coming, and try and schedule them
And
accordingly.
see,
But
all of
that's
that
all we've
could,
done.
all of that could feed into
Yeah,
the community
it
plans.
should.
One of the things that we are doing with the new community plans that's a little different is we are, in our transportation studies, we are looking at creating those transportation fees that we sometimes use in specific plans so that we can, at least even in the first few, begin to generate some money to help communities with the transportation improvements that they need.
Now, you just mentioned the next topic, and that's specific plans. On your list here, you don't have specific plans, yet they're part of some of these. I don't know how many there are, but are they part of the schedule when you say North Ridge?
No, and part of the, I haven't included those. I mean, interestingly for me, when I look at the specific plans that we have in the city, they look much more like the kind of community plans
Yeah,
that I,
smaller.
or what I think of as a community plan, much more detailed. As we update the community plans and get them better, when we're doing a community plan, we need to be looking at the specific plans that are within it to make certain that we keep all of the policies aligned. So it should be done at the same time. It would be my hope that we never have to do another specific plan because the community plans will be good enough.
And finally, the personnel, were these the people we put in the budget last
Yes,
year?
it is. So,
we're there,
so
all we
you
have to do is
have
keep it going.
already, exactly, you have already established the baseline of staff that are needed.
Super.
The timetable of these community plans, how is that determined?
Well, the first few were really determined by priorities that you guys set, and frankly, I still believe that that's your role to do. After when we looked ahead, we did it based on a couple of things. We set some criteria. We wanted to look at communities that had a lot of development pressure with old plans that weren't adequate to guide the development in that community. So we looked at development pressure. We looked at the age of the community plans. And frankly, I looked at something else. I looked at trying to congregate community. In the old days, I think we tried to do one in this district, one in here, and we tried to spread them out. But there is a great economy of scale if we can do plans that are in the same vicinity, because then we can do our environmental reports looking comprehensively beyond the boundaries. I think there is an economy of scale. I think that we can get better traffic reports. I think we can get better EIRs if we're looking at a larger area.
That makes sense. A question, though, in my district, as you know, Santa Monica's had no planning relationship with LA City at all. So we have a job capital on the west side in Santa Monica.
Exactly.
And we have gridlock early morning, late at night, every single day, north, south, east, west. And since they were so aggressive in the 80s, 90s, and now we get about 300,000 car trips, I'm told, into our district every day. When I look at some of these places that are way out, like you take Venice, doesn't start until the year 2012, which is really crushed right now on Lincoln Boulevard and on
And
these
see,
other
we're
boulevards.
flexible about that. I mean, I think we took a guess at what it might look like, but I think we fully understand that's negotiable, and we're willing to listen to
So
what
at this
you're...
point, we like the first one because you're already starting with West LA to be,
Yes.
parochial about it. But we could now talk about if we do Palms and Mar Vista or
I
we do
think that
Venice.
our recommendation on the very next one is Central City North because it's a hole, and we need to fill that in really quickly. And from then on, I think that we're flexible.
It's open to discuss that.
Certainly.
Get that through. Now, going forward, what relationship are you establishing with Culver City and Santa Monica and Marina Del Rey, which are three entities in my district?
Well, I will tell you that I have established at least an initial relationship with the planning directors of those cities. I have gone to lunch with those planning directors, so I know who they are, and I can pick up the phone and call. Typically, the place where you have, or at least the place where I'm used to having the interaction, is through the regional transportation body. In San Diego, I did that through SANDAG, but it's a much smaller organization. So I'm actually talking to folks at SCAG about creating some sort of forum for planning directors so that we can meet on a regular basis to talk about issues that go across the boundaries and to begin to establish relationships so that we can pick up the phone and call one another and talk about what's happening. I know that the planning department was recently criticized because we did not perhaps aggressively enough react to a proposal in some other jurisdiction. And frankly, there's not sort of a process for that, but we need to look at that so that we can.
I like what you're saying there. For instance, Culver City is proposing a big complex, and my planning deputy has gone to their meetings.
Right.
I've talked to the elected officials of Culver City about it. It just will make my Westchester more impacted. Would you be engaged in those discussions?
I would
with
be
Culver
happy
City?
to be engaged, and I think that it is important that we begin to have that kind of dialogue with other jurisdictions.
Great. And another issue, minor as it might sound, is Costco, which is a Culver City store, is on the edge of Venice at Lincoln Boulevard there. There's $1.5 million that Costco will not give out if we don't make a decision in the next couple of 3 months. That is the County of L.A., the City of Los Angeles, and the City of Culver.
Is it a tax agreement?
It is a dollar flow from them to mitigate the traffic concerns that they've created by having their Costco.
Right.
We're about to lose it. Have you been made aware of it?
I have not been engaged in that at all.
Yeah, see, those kinds of things, we somehow have to have that,
Right.
that clarity.
Right.
I just heard about it this morning,
Yeah.
and therefore that's...
Yeah, and see, those are things that in my old life I would have heard about at SCAG and through
Yeah.
our regular meetings. But and I also understand that it's a much bigger challenge here when you have SCAG that has 80 or 90 jurisdictions. It's not comparable, and so I don't mean to compare it. But if that's not the place, we need to find out where is the place where we can all meet together and talk about common problems.
Because in my particular district, I can't speak for any other district, because many of them don't have anything but the City of L.A.
Right.
in their core. I have Santa Monica in the heart of my district, literally, and then Culver City, major swath, and the Marina Del Rey issue there and the 90 freeway and all the other things. So I definitely need that coordinated effort among those other three jurisdictions and us. And if I need to do something that you think makes sense from a codification standpoint, I'd love to do it, because it has to be tied together.
We'll talk more.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Might suggest you look, when you talk to SCAG, they have what they call sub-regions, and there's a West LA sub-region, which is where you get the most cities that come butt up to the City of LA. So you might want to do it on a sub-region basis.
Yeah, and I might even take it a step
There's
further.
a structure there that's really...
We have joined this COG. It's Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, Santa Monica, Culver City, and LA County. I joined it the moment I came on board, though the rules were one government, one vote. And I represent over 250 people, a lot more than the smaller towns do. But the two issues we're engaged in are homelessness and transportation issues. So I really feel officially the planning department should be part of that group, because all of us are in that together. Thanks.
Mr. Chair? You've raised an interesting point that we've been relying on specific plans because we didn't have enforced community plans. So it's safe to say that we've had too many specific plans because of the weaknesses of our community plans, correct? It's just an interesting point because we always go to them. We need something done in our districts, we go to specific plans as opposed to...
because it gives you the level of detail that you are not getting in your community plans, which you should be getting. Yeah.
Exactly. My final question is it safe to say then that the fee study, or the revenues we would receive from any new fees charged would not be available to us in this coming fiscal year?
I don't want to say that they won't be available. I'm struggling to believe that they'll be available at the very beginning, but I am hopeful. I mean, I think we should get the fee studies done as quickly as we can and get them in place. But for instance, if they're telling me that the fee study will, if they tell me it takes 3 months, I guess there's some minor hope that we could get it. But if they tell me it takes actually 6, then we're
But
not
we
going to be able to get it in place at the very beginning of the fiscal year. But I would still hope that we would make every effort to get it in place as quickly as possible to sort of stop the bleeding.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just add, that's one of the things I want to clarify, is that you said earlier that the current RFP is out, comes back about end of February, and that possibly in March, we could have contracts.
Yes.
Okay, but now, is there a requirement that the consultant be in place before the 3 to 6 months of the study?
Well, the consultant actually begins the work, and the consultant is telling us, we were hoping that we could get it done, and I think that we had told them we expected the contract to be done in 3 to 4 months. And at the pre-proposal conference, their feedback to us was that they saw this more as a 3 to 6 month effort.
Okay, so the consultant is in place?
No. The
Okay.
consultants, we went out with an RFP. A bunch of people looked at the RFP and said, we're interested. We had a pre-proposal conference. That's a meeting where they come and talk to us before they respond to the RFP.
Maybe I'm unclear. That is the RFP for the consultant or for the study?
The RFP is for the consultant to do the
To
study.
do the study?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So then
Yeah.
the consultant then is on board, then the 3 to 6 months
Exactly.
starts.
Exactly.
Okay. And then if we tie in whatever you recommend with ordinances and whatever, we may be thinking about, what, early 209?
Is that what it looks like?
I mean, because if we're thinking about 6 months.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically, we could be thinking about first quarter of 209 for these ordinances to go
Right.
forward.
Right.
We are still looking at different options to make the fee study recommendations come forward faster.
Right.
Because even though the contractor, the potential contractors say they might take longer than 3 to 4 months, the planning fee, we have done some preliminary analysis in the past. There are fees that are have a much lower recovery rate, or fees that are paid more frequently. Those can be listed as higher priority study areas. So if we can set different milestones and come forward with things that can recoup our costs sooner, we will do that too. But we do need to negotiate with the consultant.
You can be assured that we are going to push this as quickly as we can. We understand the dire circumstances.
Then let me ask you, on the surcharge that you mentioned earlier, the general plan maintenance fee, how much do you expect for that to cut into some of or mitigate some of the costs that you put on your report? Does that?
It's hard for me to guess. I'm trying to remember in San Diego, and it was a small fee, and it's a smaller city, less development. I think that we generated around $6 million a year out of the general plan maintenance fee. $6 million may be high, I'm sorry. It was closer to a little less than $1 million was from the general plan maintenance fee.
So the thing is that if we look in the, I'm just trying to get an idea of what you could generate on the surcharge versus what is hard money that we'd have to come up with on the figures. Are we talking 50%? Are we talking more than that? Or?
It's difficult for me to judge because the fee study will not establish what's the cost of maintaining all of this. It will establish what portion of it we might be able to attribute directly, to benefit a developer. Okay. And I think in San Diego, it was something in the nature of 5% of their cost of their permits. It was just a percentage surcharge that was on top of it. So I don't know what the permit charges are going to be yet until we do the fee study. Okay. So it's difficult for me to judge what that might be.
Okay.
We have asked the consultants to look at the neighboring cities and cities of comparable size, and to look at their fee structure and the percentage. I'm sure that if any city like San Diego has a planned maintenance fee, that it will be in our study, and then we can determine the appropriate percentage to charge.
But will that service fee or the maintenance fee be a part of the study, or do you have to do that after you've
No,
completed?
it's a part of this study. So when they come forward with all of the fees, I want them to be able to tell us what is an appropriate surcharge that we could charge for a general plan maintenance fee.
Let me ask you, has there been any consideration that because it's going to take a while for that maintenance fee to start accumulating, what is the impact if we went to a 10 to 12-year program versus an 8 to 10-year program?
I haven't looked at that, have not looked at it at all.
I mean, so that, but you accumulate funds over a longer period of time.
We could look at what would it take to do that.
Because I'm just trying to be realistic when we look at the dollar figures on your report, that there's going to be real dollars there.
Right. You know, one of the things I could probably do quickly, I know that the fee study in San Diego was only a couple of years ago, and it looked at what all of the other cities were doing in terms of a general plan maintenance fee. I probably could get that information fairly quickly and begin to make some projections that would give us some idea, and I will try to do that.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a simple, what do we do in a 36-month period, which is the first plan in my West LA? You know, I like to see a simple statement, year one, this is what we will go.
We have that, and I will share it with you.
Because I'd like to share it with my community groups up front now.
Absolutely.
How they can become participants in this. I'd like to take advantage of the neighborhood council and all of the community groups in West LA and kind of make it a model for each of the other parts of my district going forward.
And we love to have council members very engaged in the process.
In fact, I go a step further. Once you get me that data and we blast it out to everybody in the district, I want to have an initial meeting with you and your staff and all of those community groups and say, here's what our plans are over the next 36 months. Here's how we do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they're all read into it. And of course, right next door is Mar Vista and Palms, and they're going to be very curious to see how it will impact them because obviously they're the same piece of land contiguous to each other. Thanks.
We did that in San Lantonga, which is one of the ones, the next three. We kind of did put together a working group.
Great.
That is starting to plan, so they don't, it's not that, the official notice is not the first time they hear about it.
Right.
So
Exactly. Great.
Okay. So I think it's unanimous on this committee that we move the Plum report with the recommendation from the Planning Department, and that when this comes to council, that maybe you could bring forth that information from San Diego to give us an idea of the cost and the mitigation. And let me ask, Ray, would this be, as we adopted, a financial policy, or would it just, what would it be? I mean, because we're saying, as a policy, we should put in place this 10-year cycle. Where would that fit? Just
I think that's just a general policy that the council would set,
I mean, where would we find it? I mean, that's where we have trouble. I mean, if we approve it, what book does it, is it administrative code? I mean, because the thing
I
is once
probably
we're
would
through-
carry a copy of it on my body at all times.
I'm just wondering, for reference, where does it go if we approve, what policy? Because we're generating a very distinctive policy that has an impact on the budget, that we're saying we're going to fund this cycle every 10 years. But where do we find it if we make that judgment?
That's a good question. Let me just touch base with CLA and how we handle some of those policies, and we'll get back before we get to council.
We can do the council, but I just want to make sure we don't go through all this work and then can't find it once all of us are gone. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
You're going to get clarity on where the policy is?
Yeah, where we would have some. I don't know. I don't know if we've ever.